Hello, my name is Günel Əyyubova. I am senior lecturer of Department of Histology, Embryology and Cytology of Azerbaijan Medical University. Today we are going to talk with you about the endocrine system. We know that endocrine system, it is the system which provide controlling of metabolic activities of the body to bring about the homeostasis. And we have another system that is a nervous system which also function in controlling the body functions, but it provides its functions via release of neurotransmitter substances. The function of the endocrine system is more diffuse and more prolonged because endocrine system include ductless glands that produce hormones, the biologic active substances that are released into the blood circulation or into the lymph or other tissue fluids. So by that way, the hormones reach their target organs to influence their functions. So the nervous system together with the endocrine system, they integrate, they interact with each other to control, modulate the body functions. Here we are looking at those glands which we are going to talk. Hypothalamus, pineal gland, pituitary gland. These are actually they are located in skull. Some of them, these are parts of the brain, and they are the central organs of the endocrine system. We have also peripheral organs. They are thyroid gland, parathyroid glands, and the adrenal glands. These are, so they comprise the peripheral endocrine organs. We also have organs which associate the endocrine functions with non-endocrine. For example, pancreas, which have endocrine and the exocrine functions. We also have the sexual glands. These are ovary and testes in male and in female. They also provide production of hormones. At the same time, they have other function. They produce sexual cells. So the endocrine system, as just I mentioned, that these are organs, tissues, and cells that secrete hormones. They will reach their target cells. Actually, in the body, we know two kinds of the glands. These are exocrine glands, which have ducts, and they release their secrete onto the body surfaces, into the body cavities via their ducts. And we have endocrine glands, which have not any ducts. So homeostasis, it's maintenance of internal conditions, even if the external conditions are changing. So it is a dynamic balance of electrolytes and other biologic active substances in the body. The function of the endocrine system, the control of its organs functions is provided via the mechanisms of feedback systems. The hormones, these are biologic active substances, and there are some classification of them. Most of the more accepted classification is according to their chemical nature. And according to their chemical nature, the hormones we can subdivide into the amino acid derivatives, for example, thyroxine, and which is produced from the tyrosine amino acid, adrenaline, also the serotonin, which is produced from the tryptophan amino acid, melatonin also. We have small peptides. Most of the hormones are peptides, polypeptides. For example, vasopressin, thyroid releasing hormones, and other hormones of the pituitary gland. Then we have proteins, for example, insulin, then the growth hormone. We have steroids, which are produced from the cholesterol, and they are cortisol. These are hormones of the suprarenal cortex, then testosterone and sexual hormones like testosterone, progesterone, estrogens. All of these hormones we can subdivide into two main groups according to their solubility within the water. So we have water-soluble hormones, they are hydrophilic hormones, and we have hydrophobic, which cannot be dissolved within the water. They are actually lipids, these are steroids. So all of these three groups of hormones belong to hydrophilic hormones, and the fourth group, steroids, they are hydrophobic. And here we have this classification just I mentioned, and now we are talking how these hormones will act on the body cells and organs. We have different modes of secretion and action of chemical messengers, actually which we studied in previous semester when we told about the cell signaling. We know that we have signaling cell which sends signal to the target, and we have the target cell which receives that signal. For that purpose, on the target cell have to be located the receptor which will receive that signal. In this case, signal, it is chemical messenger. The chemical messenger which is produced from the signaling cell, then it is released from that cell, and it will go to its target where it will bind to its receptor. So on the target cell should be the receptor which will bind that messenger. And according to distance, according to the types of signaling, we have autocrine, in which the hormone is produced from the cell, and the receptor for that hormone is located on the surface of that cell itself. That type of signaling is called autocrine. It means the hormone, it will influence the cell itself. Then we have paracrine. Paracrine, when between the signaling cell that produces hormone and its target there is some distance. It's not so far distance. For example, in the pyloric part of the stomach we have G cells which produce gastrin. The gastrin then will diffuse enter extracellular fluid, and it will diffuse through the extracellular spaces, and it will reach the fundus of the stomach, where located cells that have receptors for that gastrin. So the hormone will go some distance and will influence its target cell, which is at some distance from the signaling cell. And we have endocrine action when the signaling cell which produces hormone, the chemical messenger, and then this hormone it enters the bloodstream, or it may enter the lymphatic vessel. Via the bloodstream, via the blood vessels inside of the blood, the hormone is transported toward its target, which is located at some distance. It may be located far away from the signaling cell. So the target cell is located far away from the signaling cell, and it has also a receptor. The hormone will bind to its receptor on the target cell and influence its activity. Then we have neurotransmitter action when we have here the neuron, nerve cell, and its axon, which comes to the target cell. For example, it may be neurosecretor cell. It is neuron, and at the same time it's secretor cell, and it produces, so this cell produces some chemical substance, messenger, which transported inside of the axon, and then it will release from the synaptic ending and bind to receptor on the target cell. So that will be synaptic signaling. So the central organs of endocrine system, these are hypothalamus. Here we are. We have hypothalamus, which is, we know that that is part of diencephalon. Then we have hypophysis or pituitary gland, and we have pineal gland. The pineal gland, it is the epithalamus. Hypothalamus, it is the center of the endocrine system, and we know that it is also a center which controls many functions of the body, which are associated with behavior controlling, with the body temperature, also blood pressure controlling, and thirst and hunger controlling center. And hypothalamus send its output, its signals in two ways. First, it sends signals to the centers of autonomic nervous system, which are autonomic nuclei of the brain stem, which belong to the cranial nerves. So hypothalamus sends signals via nerve fibers to the centers of autonomic nervous system. Also, hypothalamus sends its signals via production hormones, and how the hormones are released into the blood circulation we will talk later. Hypothalamus actually, for endocrine activity, we have to know that there are two parts of hypothalamus. It's anterior hypothalamus and middle part of the hypothalamus. So the information, the hormones which produced in the hypothalamus, they will be transported into the pituitary gland, into the pituitary gland or hypophysis, and then they will control release of the hormones from the hypophysis, and then the hypophysis will also produce its own hormones. But for controlling, hypothalamus have to receive information. It receives it from the central nervous system, from the higher centers of the brain. So it will take sensory information from the higher centers, higher brain centers, which will send signals via release of neurotransmitters into the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus will produce its own hormones into the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary will produce its own hormones. These are trop hormones, and they will go to target glands of the endocrine system. They are, for example, in this case, that is a thyroid gland, for example. It may be other gland. Then that gland will produce its own hormones. That hormones will control functions of the organs and tissues. So by this hierarchy, we will see modulation, our glands and our organs. So now we are coming to some of the system which belong to the endocrine system, but here it comprises individual cells which do not have we have in our body individual cells which do not form organs. They are just scattered throughout our body in other systems, in organs of other systems. For example, in digestive system, respiratory system, urinary systems, we have those cells which situated throughout the body, and these cells also produce hormones, biologically active substances, that these hormones will control functions of nearby cells. They compose the diffuse neuroendocrine system. Another name of it is APUD system. What means it? It's amino precursor uptake and decarboxylation. So a main feature of these cells that compose DNES system. Its ability of all of these cells to uptake amino acid precursors, amino precursors, and to decarboxylate them. So they will act mainly in paracrine manner because, just as I mentioned, they will control the functions of nearby cells and tissues. So the endocrine glands, central organs, these are hypothalamus, pineal gland, and hypophysis. Peripheral glands, then they are thyroid, parathyroids, and the adrenal glands, and the organs with endocrine and non-endocrine function, pancreas, testes, ovary, etc. And finally, the NES system. To understand the functions of the endocrine system, we have to mention the feedback mechanisms. Here we are looking how the feedback mechanism will act on the example of the sexual hormones production. For the production of sexual cells by the ovary, the signal have to release from the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus produces releasing factors, releasing hormones. In this case, it produces gonadotropin releasing hormone. It is produced from hypothalamus, then it is transported to the pituitary gland, to the anterior pituitary. There, pituitary will produce its own hormones. These are tropic hormones: LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicular stimulating hormone. Then these hormones are coming to the ovaries, and because they have receptors there, they will stimulate cells of the ovary. They are follicular cells which will produce these hormones, estrogens and progesterone. If they are produced in enough amount, so amount of estrogens and progesterones which circulate within the bloodstream, it will increase, and by that way the hypothalamus, which richly endowed with the blood capillaries, the hormones which circulate within the bloodstream will have negative impact on the hypothalamus, and hypothalamus will stop production of, or at least will decrease production of gonadotropin releasing hormone. So it is the negative feedback if the hormone is produced in enough amount. But if there is deficiency of estrogens and progesterones in blood, so cells of hypothalamus sense this condition and they will increase production of the gonadotropin releasing hormone that will stimulate pituitary. Pituitary will produce its LH and FSH. It will stimulate ovary to produce more amount of the sexual hormones. The same in the male case, in case of the male. The same hormones will come, but with FSH and LH in this case stimulate the testes to produce testosterone. If testosterone is produced in enough amount, so the gonadotropin releasing hormone will decreased in amount, so it will have negative impact on the production of this hormone. But in other case, we will have positive feedback. So we have positive and feedback mechanisms, control mechanisms for hormone production. In this case, we have the production of in high amount of testosterone, so it will inhibit production of the hormones by the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. If there is low amount, production will be stimulated, so it will be positive feedback. So we have negative or positive feedback control. So we have to take in mind and remember that endocrine system, it is the self-controlling system. Now let's talk about how the hormones influence our cells. As we know, all of the hormones we subdivide according to their chemical nature. We subdivided them into the hydrophilic hormones, which are peptides, polypeptides, amino acid derivatives, and we have steroid hormones, which are hydrophobic. As we know, hydrophilic substances, they cannot pass through the cell membrane. That's why the receptors located on the surface of the cell membrane. They are located in the membrane of the target cells, because those hormones cannot pass through the membrane. And when the hormone, for example, protein hormone, comes to the target cell, it binds to its receptor, which is specific for that hormone. And here we can see binding of the ligand, in this case hormone, to its receptor. Then we will have here activation of the second messengers. For example, in this case G protein. It may activate other enzymes, for example adenylyl cyclase, which will produce other second messengers, for example cyclic AMP. And all of these second messengers will relay this information to the intracellular components, and it will the activity of the hormone will be translated into the intracellular actions. For example, in the cell may be produced some proteins, it may activate some genes, or it may start some biochemical, the cascade of biochemical reactions. So it is the response of the cell to that hormone. And in case of the hydrophobic hormones, which can pass through the cell membrane, for example, glucocorticoids, androgens, these are steroid hormones, or in this case, estrogens and progesterones. Then we will talk that these hormones, they circulate within the bloodstream via the carrier proteins. They have to bind to carrier proteins, which circulate within the bloodstream. When these come to the target cell, they release from the carrier and they pass through the cell membrane and enter the cell cytoplasm. Inside of the cytoplasm or the nucleoplasm located the receptor that is called cytoplasmic receptor, or it may be nuclear receptor here. The hormone binds to its receptor. Then this receptor has nuclear localization signal. It means that this complex hormone receptor complex will be translocated into the nucleus. Then it have binding sites for the DNA promoter sites. That complex binds to the region of the DNA, that is promoter region, and activates transcription of certain genes. Finally, the cell will produce some proteins. It will be the response of the cell to that hormone. So that is an example of activity of the steroid hormones. So the receptors for the steroid hormones may be located inside of the cytoplasm or the nuclear plasm. They will activate some genes, there will be mRNA produced transcription, then the new proteins will be produced. In this case, so the hormones which have nuclear receptor, these are steroid hormones, also hormones of the thyroid gland, some hormones, these are thyroid hormones. Then we are coming to the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland, it is a hypophysis. It has two portions. It is adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis. Here we are looking at the hypothalamus. We know that hypothalamus and hypophysis, they are connected with each other via stalk. Development of the hypophysis or pituitary gland, it has two sources for development. First of all, from the roof of the oral cavity in embryo, from the roof of the oral cavity, it's in embryonic life, we have outpocketing, that is Rathge's pouch, it is diverticulum from the roof of the oral cavity. It grows upward, and from the diencephalon, the bottom of the diencephalon or the floor of the diencephalon will also form some outpocketing, that is the diverticulum that will grow downward. Then these two will meet each other, so that diverticulum is called Rathge's pouch, and that is downgrowth of diencephalon. They will meet each other, and they will be surrounded by common capsule, and the hypophysis will be formed. That is, adenohypophysis developed from the Rathge's pouch from the roof of the oral cavity, and it has ectodermal origin. And neurohypophysis has neural origin because, as we know, as we just mentioned, it developed from the downgrowth of the diencephalon. That's why they will have different structure and different functions. The same we have here. So the hypophysis is formed. Here we are looking how they are related to each other, hypothalamus and pituitary gland in the natural view. That is histological section, a slide of the interrelations between the hypothalamus, that is third ventricle, bottom of the third ventricle, mammillary bodies, then adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis. That is the dura mater and arachnoid and pia mater, which these are menings of the brain which surround the hypophysis. We know that hypophysis is located in the hypophyseal fossa of the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. And now the parts of the adenohypophysis. Adenohypophysis has three parts. It is first of all pars distalis, then pars intermedia, and pars tuberalis. Neurohypophysis also has three parts, that is pars nervosa, infundibulum, and median eminence. These are parts of neurohypophysis. Now we are coming to the interrelations between the hypothalamic nuclei and the hypophysis. Actually, we have to take in mind that from the anterior part of the hypothalamus that include two nuclei. They are supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei. They are located neurosecretory cells. These are neurons, but they are at the same time, these are secretory cells. That's why they produce hormones. The axons of these neurons, they come down and they will pass through the stalk of the infundibular stalk, and they come to the neurohypophysis. And inside of the neurohypophysis, they form dilatations. By that way, hormones that produced in the anterior hypothalamus in supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei, they are transported to the neurohypophysis. That is the hypothalamo-neurohypophyseal system. Hypothalamo-neurohypophyseal system, by which way the hormones are transported to the neurohypophysis. Here the terminal parts of the axon, they form dilatations. They will call herring bodies. Inside of the herring bodies, the hormones will be accumulated, and when it is needed, they are released into the bloodstream. But now to talk about the hypothalamo-adenohypophyseal system, we have to mention first of all the blood supply of the hypophysis. We have to know that hypophysis is supplied by two kinds of arteries that are that is the inferior hypophyseal artery and superior hypophyseal artery. Both of them, they are branches of internal carotid artery. First of all, inferior hypophyseal artery, it comes to the neurohypophysis. Inside of the neurohypophysis, it forms branches, it forms capillary network. Then, from these capillaries will arise venules, and they form hypophyseal veins, which will carry out blood from the neurohypophysis. The capillaries which are formed here, these are fenestrated capillaries. It means that in their wall there are thin regions, these are fenestrations, which provide more intense exchange of the substances between the blood and between the tissue of the neurohypophysis. So by that way, hormones will release into the blood circulation. Now we are coming to the superior hypophyseal artery, and as we see here, the superior hypophyseal artery superior hypophyseal artery, it comes to the median eminence and form capillary network here in the median eminence. So that capillary network will be called primary capillary network. Then from these capillaries will arise venules which will form portal veins. As we see here, these are hypophyseal portal veins. These veins will descend and they will enter the adenohypophysis, and inside of the adenohypophysis they form branches, they form capillary network. This capillary network will be called secondary capillary network. So we have here primary capillary network and the secondary capillary network. From here, from these capillaries will arise venules which will collect it into the veins, and these veins, these hypophyseal veins will carry out blood from the adenohypophysis. So as we see here, blood supply of the neurohypophysis is separated from the blood supply of the adenohypophysis. Then, so that location is very important for proper functioning of these organs. In which, first of all, we have to take in mind that capillaries of primary capillary network and secondary capillary network, both of them, these capillaries belong to fenestrated capillaries because their wall have fenestrations, pores, perforations through which hormones will enter bloodstream. Then there is also, they are large in diameter, that's why they call sinusoidal capillaries. What we have to know about the hypothalamo-adenohypophyseal system, that as I just mentioned that we have anterior hypothalamus and we have middle part. In middle part there are other nuclei. They are arcuate nuclei, infundibular nuclei, ventromedial, paraventricular, and dorsal medial nuclei. There are a lot of nuclei which also include neurosecretory cells, but these cells produce different hormones. They called liberins and statins, or releasing hormones and inhibitory hormones. These hormones, via axons of these cells, neurosecretory cells, they will be transported into the capillaries of primary capillary network, as here that is median eminence, that include primary capillary network, that is secondary capillary network, and between them that is a portal vein which carry blood from the primary network to the secondary one. So the axons of these neurosecretory cells, they come to the primary network, and here they form dilatations. There is formed axovasal synapses. These are synapses between the axons and blood vessels. By that way, the hormones will release into the blood circulation inside of the primary capillary network. Then these hormones together with blood will be carried, will be transported via portal vein, and they will carry it into the anterior hypophysis, adenohypophysis. Here also located fenestrated capillaries, and through their wall those hormones which produced in hypothalamus, which are coming from hypothalamus, they released into the tissue of the adenohypophysis, and those hormones will control functioning of the endocrine cells which are located in adenohypophysis. So those liberins and statins, or releasing hormones, and inhibitory hormones will stimulate or inhibit functioning of the endocrine cells in adenohypophysis. Then these cells of hypophysis produce their own hormones, and they enter the blood circulation through the wall of these capillaries, and via the veins these hormones will enter the general blood circulation to reach their targets. Then here, just I mentioned that paraventricular and supraoptic nucleus, this is a nuclei of the adenohypophysis. These are nuclei of the hypothalamus, anterior hypothalamus, and the axons, as we see here, they come to the neurohypophysis, and these nuclei include neurosecretor cells which produce ADH, antidiuretic hormone, or vasopressin, and oxytocin. These hormones, they transported, mainly supraoptic nucleus produce ADH, paraventricular produce oxytocin. Then these hormones are transported to the neurohypophysis to enter the blood circulation. ADH will influence the kidney tubules to increase absorption of the water, and it will prevent loss of the water from the body. It also leads to vasoconstriction, increasing arterial pressure. Oxytocin, it influences the uterus and it stimulates contraction of the smooth muscles in the wall of the uterus, or the myometrium, which is very important during parturition. Oxytocin also stimulates production of the milk, release of the milk from the mammary gland. Now we are looking at the neurohypophysis slide, histological section of the neurohypophysis. Neurohypophysis, as we know, is developed from the diencephalon. It has neural tissue, include neural tissue, and here we can find pituitary. These are glial cells. These are glial cells of the pituitary gland, and they have supportive function here. Also, we have the dilatations of the terminals of the axons of neurosecretor cells, which come here from the hypothalamus. These dilatations are called herring bodies. Inside of the herring bodies, taking place accumulation of the hormones ADH and oxytocin. But those hormones, they are transported here via transporting proteins inside of the axons. These are neuromedins. Also in the vesicles here will be stored calcium ions, ATP, and will be released together with hormones. The hormones then release into the blood circulation through the wall of the capillaries which present in the neurohypophysis. Herring bodies in electron-microscope representation, the terminals of axons, these are the dilatations, and here we are looking at the secretor vesicles, this secretor granules that contains those hormones. And that is the wall of the capillary, the blood cell of the capillary, that is endothelial cells. Through the wall of the capillaries, the hormones enter the blood circulation. And adenohypophysis. Adenohypophysis, it has ectodermal origin, and here we have two main kinds of cells. These are chromophobes, which have not any stain, and chromophils. Chromophils, we have two types of them, acidophils and basophils. Acidophils and basophils, they are called because of their staining features. And these staining features is due to presence of secretor vesicles, secretor granules that contain hormones. The cells produce hormones and that are stored within the secretor vesicles. According to the staining features, they subdivide into acidophils and basophils. Here we are looking at the blood capillary. The chromophobic cells, they have not any stain because they do not have those granules. They are both, maybe they are not fully mature cells which haven't yet produced their hormones, or they may be degranulated cells which release their hormones, have already released them. And here we are looking at the stalk which connect the pituitary and hypothalamus. Here we are looking at the infundibulum. Here we are looking at the stalk of the hypothalamus and hypophysis that connects them. Here the portal vein, the section of the portal vein which contain blood cells. Through the portal vein, the hormones we know that transported from the median eminence to the adenohypophysis. And here the pars tuberalis, which contain epithelioid cells which form cords here. Their activity is not fully determined. Then we have here, we can see adenohypophysis, which is darkly stained, neurohypophysis, lightly stained, and pars intermedia. Pars intermedia is also part of the adenohypophysis. Here we have cysts, which colloid field cysts. Also in pars intermedia we have a little amount of the cells which produce hormones. The hormone which is produced here, it is the large peptide which is called pro-opiomelanocortin. When it breaks down, from that peptide released, there are released the hormones. This is adrenocorticotropic hormone, melanocyte stimulating hormone, and lipotropic hormone. Here we have also we can see hypothalamo-hypophyseal interactions, just I mentioned. And we are coming to kinds of cells in hypophysis. So we have to take in mind that acidophils and basophils of hypophysis, they also have several types. From the basophils, we have to mention first of all the cells which produce adrenocorticotropic hormone. Actually, adrenocorticotropic hormone initially is produced as a large peptide, just I mentioned, that is a pro-opiomelanocortin. When this large peptide will break down, from it will be released lipotropic hormone, melanocyte stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Also, their endorphins are beta endorphins. They are released into the blood circulation. And main hormone here is ACTH. The target of it is adrenal gland. The hormone TSH, it stimulates production of the thyroid hormones. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, they will stimulate sexual glands to produce their hormones. Then acidophils, we have of two types. Actually 50% of all of the cells of all of the chromophils of the adenohypophysis, they are somatotrophs. They produce somatotropin or growth hormone. The targets of growth hormones, that is adipose tissue, muscle tissue. Also, the growth hormone will stimulate production of the growth factors in liver, which will stimulate growth, elongation of the long bones. It will stimulate epiphyseal plate of the long bones to stimulate growth. Then, so that is here we are looking at the neurohypophysis, which produce its own hormones. ADH target is kidney tubules. Oxytocin target muscles of the uterus, and also the mammary gland. If the prolactin, which produced by acidophils, it stimulates mammary gland to produce milk, then the oxytocin will also stimulate mammary, but ducts of the mammary gland to release hormone, not produce but release that hormone. Also, we have to mention that the weight of the hypophysis is 0.6 gram, but in female it's a little more. Which gave birth, the female that gave birth, the pituitary is more, 1.2 gram. It is because of the increase in amount of the mammatrophs which produce prolactin. And pineal gland. Pineal gland is epiphysis. It is part of the main part of epithalamus that developed from the roof of the diencephalon, roof of the second brain vesicle, and that is located in the roof of the thalamus between cerebellum and cerebral hemispheres. The epiphysis, it includes mainly two types of cells. There are interstitial cells and pinealocytes. Pinealocytes, they have processes which come in contact with the blood vessels, and they produce their hormones, mainly melatonin, into the blood circulation. Interstitial cells, these are glial cells, which are supporting cells. Also, inside of the pineal gland, we can find the brain sand, that these are accumulations of the calcium salts with glycoproteins, core. The amount of them increase with increasing of the age, and that is the marker for recognition of the epiphysis in the MRI investigations. Main function of the epiphysis is controlling of circadian processes, adjustment of the body functions to the light or dark periods of the day. It controls it by production of melatonin. Melatonin is produced in the night period of day from the serotonin, and serotonin, we know that is produced from the tryptophan amino acid. Also, melatonin has inhibitory function on the production of the sexual hormones in the hypothalamus and hypophysis. So it has antigonadotropic effect. Then we can see here epiphysis. These are the cells of the pinealocytes. They are staining by the silver impregnation, and so that is a pineal gland. Also, now we are coming, here we can see in these pinealocytes, which are in contact with the blood capillaries, and they release their hormones into the blood stream. Thyroid gland, it is the gland which belongs to the peripheral endocrine or endocrine system. The thyroid gland, it is a gland that controls metabolic activities of the body. Here we can see it. It includes right and left lobe. Between them we have isthmus of thyroid gland, and it may have pyramidal lobe. It actually develops from the outpocketings of the third pharyngeal pouch. And so pyramidal lobe of in some cases, thyroid may have pyramidal lobe, and it's a remnant of the thyroglossal duct. That is a way by which the thyroid will descend toward its final location. Here we have this pyramidal lobe, that's isthmus, and also behind the thyroid we have parathyroid glands. They are 4 in number, which located in the back of the thyroid, in superior and inferior poles of thyroid gland. Thyroid gland structural and functional unit, these are follicles which are filled with colloid. And parafollicular gland's structural feature, it is characterized by the cords of cells. Here we can see the oxyphilic cells of parathyroid and chief cells of parathyroid. Both of these glands, because they belong to endocrine glands, they are richly endowed with the blood capillaries, and these blood capillaries, all of them, they belong to fenestrated capillaries. Thyroid gland, it parenchymatous organ. It is surrounded by connective tissue capsule. From that capsule arise connective tissue septum. The connective tissue septa subdivides the gland into individual lobules, as we see here, one lobule, then the other one, and each lobule includes these follicles surrounded structures. They filled with colloid, and in the wall of the follicles we have cells. These are follicular cells, or they called T thyrocytes. Pay attention, T thyrocytes. These are cuboidal cells, these epithelial cells. They are surrounded by basal lamina or basement membrane, and around basement membrane there is network of reticular fibers and capillaries. Thyroid gland is one of the organs which rich in blood supply. There are a lot of blood capillaries. It's related to its function because thyroid gland produces iodine containing hormones, and the hormones need the iodine. Iodine it's taken from the blood circulation. So inside of the colloid we have thyroglobulin, and now we are coming to the function of the thyroid gland. The thyrocytes here we can see they produce hormones. The thyroid gland is a gland which produces hormones into the colloid and stores the hormones there. Then when it is needed, the cells will absorb the colloid and release the hormone into the blood circulation. How it is taking place, let's look here. Here we can see two cells in these are T thyrocytes. Actually in the at the rest they have cuboidal shape. If the cell is if the gland is overactivated, these cells will become columnar in shape. In opposite, if there is inhibited that gland, non-active, the cells may become even flattened in shape. Around the cells we have basement membrane, then the capillaries, that is the wall of the blood capillary. Number 9 indicate endothelial cells. That is the lumen of the colloid. On the surface of cells, in apical surface of cells, we have microvilli, which increase surface area. And so in first step, the cells, these follicular cells have to take up the necessary substances for production of the hormone. In the number 8, it's amino acids and all of the necessary components that are received from the blood circulation. Then in rough endoplasmic reticulum there is taking place production of the polypeptide chains. Actually that hormone thyroxine, that is main hormone, it's produced from the amino acid tyrosine. So from the tyrosine in the rough endoplasmic reticulum is produced polypeptide chains. Then they are transported to the Golgi apparatus. There the glycoproteins will bind to the proteins through protein chains. Then this glycoprotein, which is called thyroglobulin, is released into the colloid, as we see here. Then here we can see the transporter carrier protein that carries sodium together with the iodine. Iodine is ingested with the food and absorbed into the blood circulation in the wall of the small intestines. Then from the intestines, the iodine together with the blood circulation is reaches the thyrocytes or follicular cells. So in the base, the cell membrane of the basal part, there is a carrier protein which will carry, that is symporter, which carry iodine together with sodium. Then the iodine is transported through the cell. It reaches the apical cell membrane, and in the apical cell membrane we have pendrin carrier protein that will carry iodine, and it will exchange it with a chloride will enter cell and iodine will go out. On the apical surface or at the colloidal cell interface, we have the enzyme, this thyroid peroxidase, that will oxidize the iodine, and there will be formed the active iodine. Then the iodine will bind to the tyrosine residues inside of the thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin is a huge molecule. Inside of it, we have a lot of residues of tyrosine. When the one iodine will bind to the tyrosine, it will form monoiodotyrosine. Then D3 and tetraiodotyrosines we have inside of the huge thyroglobulin that fills the colloid. That is how the hormone is produced, and it will be stored within the colloid. When the cell is stimulated under the action of the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which comes from the pituitary gland. TSH is polypeptide, that's why its receptors located on the membrane of the cell. It binds to its receptor and the cell is activated. As a result, the cell will start to absorb or ingest colloid, and there's formed endocytotic vesicles that include thyroglobulin, and the endocytotic vesicles will fuse with the lysosomes, and lysosomal enzymes will break down the thyroglobulin. From the thyroglobulin will be released all of its components T3, T1, T2, and T4. From them, T1 and T2, or mono and diiodotyrosines, will be broken down inside of the cell, but T3 and T4, they released into the blood circulation. That will be the main hormones of the thyroid gland. From the hormones that released into the blood circulation, 90% of them, this is T4, and they enter the blood circulation. They will bind to the thyroxine, to the thyroid binding proteins. From them, 10% of the hormones bind to the albumins. Then also there is transerythrin, globulin proteins. They also bind those hormones. Just 1% will circulate free within the bloodstream to have negative feedback or positive feedback on the hypothalamus for controlling production of the hypothalamic hormones. Okay, then from the T3 and T4, T3 is more active, but it has a short lifespan, approximately 1 day or 18 hours mainly. But T4, it has a long lifespan, approximately 5 to 7 days. In liver and kidney, the T4 is transformed into the T3, because T3 is more active hormone, and it has more effectively pass through the cell membrane of the target cell, and it is more actively bind to the receptor. That's why T3 is more active. The deficiency of the thyroid hormones may lead, if it's to cretinism, if it's childhood deficiency, but in adult it may lead to myxedema or hypothyroidism. A high amount of the thyroid hormones or hypertrophy of the gland lead to increase of the thyroid hormones T3 and T4 in blood circulation. Activity of these hormones is controlling metabolism in our metabolic activities of the cells. That's why increased amount of the hormones will increase metabolic rates in the organs and tissues, but low amount of hormones may lead to decrease of its functions. During the fetal life, the deficiency of thyroid hormones, actually the Thyroid gland starts its functioning at the 14th week of gestation, and deficiency of the hormone in mother, in the body of the mother, or deficiency of the thyroid hormones in the fetus may lead to problems in the development of the mental function, so that will lead to problems in mental activity. Mental retardness will be observed in the newborn. And so here we can see how the thyroid gland is controlled. So hypothalamus produces thyroid releasing hormone. It influences pituitary, which produces TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and it stimulates thyroid gland to produce T3 or T4. The iodine is taken up from the blood circulation, and the gland produces its hormone. If the hormone is enough in the blood circulation, it will have negative feedback on the hypophysis that will inhibit production of TSH. But if there is iodine deficiency, which will lead to goiter, it will lead to what? Let's look here. TRH produced from hypothalamus, TSH excess in amount. It continuously activate thyroid to produce T3 or T4. But the T3, T4 will be produced in low amount because of the iodine deficiency. There is not enough iodine in blood circulation because of the dietary deficiency or so on. So low TH will have low negative feedback, so it will stimulate continuously the hypophysis to produce excess of TSH, and it will lead to hypertrophy of the thyroid gland. So we have goiter, increasing the size of the thyroid gland. Another reason, and here we can see the iodine deficiency goiter. Another deficiency, it may be another problem. It may be a problem of the immunity. It may be in the body produce antibodies against receptors of TSH. So TSH receptors we can see here. Against those receptors in the body may be produce antibodies which will continuously stimulate these cells, and they continuously will release T3 and T4 into the blood circulation. So amount of T3 and T4 in blood will be increased, but TSH will be in normal level in the blood circulation. Okay, now we are coming to parafollicular cells. They are present between the follicular cells, but they do not reach the lumen of the colloid. They called parafollicular cells. They are larger in size. Pay attention, they are larger than and lighter than the follicular cells. They called C cells because they produce calcitonin, another hormone. In the wall of the follicle, they constitute approximately 0.1% of all follicular cells that are present in the wall of the follicle. And those cells, parafollicular cells, they produce calcitonin, which decrease amount of calcium in blood circulation. It leads to absorption, to deposition of the calcium salts in the bone tissue. Parafollicular gland, parathyroid glands, which locate in the posterior surface of the thyroid, and they are surrounded by the capsule that surrounds also thyroid gland. This is a parathyroid, and that is the thyroid. Here we can see the capsule enters and separate the parafollicular from the parathyroid gland from the thyroid gland. Inside of the parathyroid, we have mainly chief cells, which are more in amount, which have basophilic cytoplasm, and low amount we have oxyphilic cells. Chief cells produce parathormone, the main hormone of the gland, and oxyphilic cells, they reach in mitochondria. They are inactive cells, they do not produce hormones. Now let's look at the interactions of the calcitonin and parathormone for controlling of the blood calcium, for the homeostasis of the calcium. Here we can see the homeostasis, it's blood calcium level, it should be normal, stable, and it's maintained by two hormones, that is a calcitonin, which is produced from the thyroid, and the parathormone, that is produced by the parathyroid gland. Here we can see the thyroid gland releases calcitonin, and calcitonin, we know that it inhibits osteoclasts, and it decreases blood calcium level, so blood calcium level falls because calcium is deposited in the bone tissue. When the blood calcium level drops, on the surface of the chief cells of the parafollicular parathyroid gland, there are receptors, calcium receptors. If the amount of calcium in blood is enough, so the calcium binds to receptors on the parathyroid gland cells, on the chief cells, and if there is enough calcium, the cells will not produce parathormone. But if there is calcium deficiency, so the cells sense this deficiency and they release their hormones, parathormone, into the blood circulation. The parathormone, it will increase level of calcium in blood. It will stimulate osteoclasts, the bone resorbing cells, which will resorb bone tissue, and blood will release into the blood circulation. Amount of it in the blood circulation will be high. Actually, we have to know that calcium level in blood should be maintained in the normal level. High amount of calcium will again stimulate the parafollicular cells, C cells of thyroid, to produce calcitonin. So that is how the level of calcium is controlled. Actually, parathormone, it also increases calcium reabsorption in the kidney tubules and the release of phosphates there. Then parathormone activates the vitamin D, it converts it into the active form. Parathormone increases absorption of the calcium in the intestines, in small intestine. So by all of the way, also it activates, just I mentioned that it activates osteoclasts, bone resorbing cells, to resorb bone tissue. From all of these sources, the calcium enters blood circulation and its amount increases finally. Adrenal gland. Adrenal glands, these are suprarenal glands which are located in superior folds of kidneys. Adrenal glands include actually two glands, the cortex and the medulla. They are different glands because they have different origin, different structure and functions. If the cortex of that is the cortex, here we are looking, that is the cortex, and that is a medulla. Cortex of the, here we can see the location of the adrenal gland. Cortex of adrenal gland, it develops from the coelomic epithelium, it is the lateral plate mesoderm, from the visceral layer of the lateral plate mesoderm. But the medulla, it has neural origin, it develops from the neural crest cells. In the cortex, we can distinguish three zones, that is zona glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. From them, 14% that is the glomerulosa, then approximately 80% or 75 to 80% fasciculata, and approximately 7% of all of the cortex, it is the zona reticularis. Each of these zones has its own structure and hormones that are produced by cells there. Zona glomerulosa here, it includes cells which form cords, and they form rounded structures. That's why they call glomerulosa, that's a zone. In here we have cells which produce mineralocorticoids, that's aldosterone or deoxycorticosterone. They are mineralocorticoids, and their amount will be increased under the activity of ADH or the angiotensin II. Then the mineralocorticoids increase absorption of sodium ions in the kidney tubules. Zona fasciculata includes cells which form cords here, and they produce glucocorticoids, for example, cortisol or corticosterone. Zona reticularis includes cells that produce dehydroepiandrosterone and androstenedione. These are male sexual hormones. According to histology of these cells, we have to take in mind that all of the hormones of the adrenal cortex, they are steroid hormones. It means that they produce from the cholesterol, so lipid hormones produced here. That's why the morphology of the cell will also correspond to their functions. Inside of the cells we will have a lot of lipid droplets, that is storage of cholesterol. Cholesterol is the main component of the low density lipoproteins, and they are stored within the cytoplasm of these cells. Then mitochondria of these cells will have its own specific structure. Here the mitochondria will have crista which have tubular shape, so tubular shaped crista will have the structure of the mitochondria of these cells, and they also reach in glycogen inclusions. Between the zona glomerulosa and fasciculata there are located stem cells which are necessary for regeneration of the cells in these zones. Then after it, we are coming to the medulla. Medulla, it includes two main kinds of cells. These are epinephrine producing cells and non-epinephrine producing cells, or adrenaline producing cells and noradrenaline. The secretory granules of this, actually, as we know that medulla has neural origin, it developed from the neural crest cells, so the cells here, they are like ganglion cells, and as cells in ganglia, they accumulate the secretory granules that will store their hormones. These are catecholamines. In adrenaline producing cells, the secretory granules, they are homogeneous, but in norepinephrine producing cells, secretory granules will have dense core. Besides, these hormones inside of secretory granules are stored, also pay attention, these cells, epinephrocytes and norepinephrocytes, they also called chromaffin cells because they are stained by chromium salts. And here postganglionic parasympathetic neuron, we have this is ganglia which belong to parasympathetic nervous system. These cells, epinephrocytes and norepinephrocytes, as I told you, they will serve as ganglion cells, and they are innervated by preganglionic sympathetic fibers, because function of the ganglia, they will perform themselves. They, under the influence of nerve impulses, they release their hormones into the blood circulation. Besides the hormones inside of the secretory granules, there is also stored calcium ions, ATP molecules, and also other. And inside of the granules we also have chromogranins, which believed to bind the epinephrine and norepinephrine inside of the secretor granules. Now we are coming to the blood supply. Adrenal gland blood supply has its own specificities. The blood vessels enter the suprarenal cortex through its capsule. There are three pairs of arteries: superior, middle, and inferior adrenal arteries. Each of them, they have their source. So superior one is a branch of phrenic artery, middle one branch of the abdominal aorta, and the inferior one it is a branch of the renal arteries. In the capsule, they form network. The arteries form network in capsule. From the capsule network arise arteries, which come to the cortex for supplying cortex. That are cortical arteries, and we have medullary arteries which descend to the medulla to supply the medulla. Pay attention here, that's capsular artery, cortical arteriole for supplying the cortex, and in cortex we have capillary network which include fenestrated sinusoidal capillaries also here. They form network here. Then the venous blood in venules will be accumulated and come down towards the medulla. And here we are looking at the medullary artery, which carry arterial blood immediately downward towards the medulla. In medulla it also forms capillary network, medullary capillaries. Then from here blood is accumulated in the veins, and medullary vein will carry out blood from the organ. What we have to pay attention here, that in the medulla, the blood comes from two sources: from capsular artery as medullary artery, it carries oxygenated blood, and also the blood which is collected from the cortex, it also will come to the medulla, that is venous blood, which reach in hormones of the adrenal cortex, and they will also have impact on controlling the activity of the cells in the medulla. Then the hormones will enter the blood circulation. The pancreas, it also has endocrine cells. Here we have to know that in pancreas we have islets of Langerhans, and here are produced hormones also. Islets of Langerhans, here we are looking in the histological slide, and that are acinar cells, that is exocrine pancreas. It includes acinar cells that produce digestive enzymes, and islets of Langerhans, they include endocrine cells. From all of the cells, 60% there are beta cells which are located in the center, and they produce insulin. At the periphery we have alpha cells which produce glucagon. Also we have D cells which produce somatostatin. PP cells produce pancreatic polypeptide. G cells produce gastrin. And 60% of cells produce insulin. Insulin, that is a hormone that controls level of glucose in the blood circulation, and in the it increases absorption of the glucose by the tissues of the body. A deficiency of insulin may lead to diabetes mellitus. Here we are looking at the beta cells, insulin producing cells, alpha cells, glucagon producing cells, delta cells, somatostatin, G cells, gastrin, PP cells produce polypeptide, pancreatic polypeptide. Each of these hormones has their own activity on the body functions. So that's all about the endocrine system. So see you on next lectures.